Right, I'm just going to say it. Assassin's Creed Black Flag is probably the one game in the series that Ubisoft could not afford to mess up. Because for a lot of people, this isn't just a good Assassin's Creed game, it's the best one. And now, more than a decade later, Black Flag Resynced is here. Edward Kenway is back, the Caribbean has had a serious glow up, and yes, I've once again lost far too much of my life sailing around listening to sea shanties. But going back to a game you loved is always a bit risky, just because is Black Flag actually still that good in 2026? Or have we all spent the last decade remembering the pirate fantasy and quietly forgetting the bits that haven't aged so well? So I've gone back, I've played it, I've compared it to the original, and here's my review of Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced. So, as mentioned, this is a remake of the beloved 4th chapter in the epic series, complete with a treasure chest of new features. So the team at Ubisoft have recreated this adventure with a complete visual overhaul, with new combat, seamless loading into cities, as well as over 6 new hours of content. Now, it's quite the attractive haul of goodies for fans old and new here. It's no mean feat, and quite a daunting one just for any team to recreate a favourite in any series. And for one so action-packed, we've got to start with the combat. So, as I mentioned, the combat system here has been upgraded, and it's striking just that sweet spot between what I would say your classic Assassin's Creed style of skirmishes and the more modern Souls-inspired RPG style. That being said, I would say it leans way more heavily to the classic style here, with a heavy focus on parry-based encounters. And as someone like myself who's well versed in the more recent style of combat in the series, it did take me a few fights to retrain myself into the more weight and counter brand of fighting here. The mistake I was making earlier on was trying to block or shield up style, holding the L1, but I quickly learned the game is almost egging you on to parry with every flash of light blue and just land that devastating takedown finisher. Once I learned this, I quickly became an expert swashbuckler. I welcomed the deeper, more advanced options available. Again, that harkens a little bit more back to the more recent titles, so your abilities in combat are tied to R2 and a face button, so whether it was sweeping an enemy's legs, kicking them into a wall, or just blasting them with your pistol, it's all designed in a way to open enemies up for takedowns and looking cool as hell doing it. Over the many skirmishes I say I would have on here, both on and offshore, I found them engaging, satisfying, and whilst yes, they did get repetitive a little over a while, I was always looking forward to getting into the action and testing myself against these groups. For those wondering, the RPG style of the modern games really bleeds into things as far as the lock-on's concerned, so the control scheme and the trinket system, which is new here, it can provide you with handy little buffs to suit your playstyle inside and outside of combat. So I would say if you weren't a fan of the modern games, I would say fear not, this is still very much more of that old school feeling Assassin's Creed experience, I would say, more so than the RPG style. Of course, I can't really talk about just that. When I say combat, the main event here is arguably the Jackdaw and the Naval combat. And of course, the Jackdaw, as I mentioned, which is your ship that's going to carry you from port to port, and the most important weapon in your arsenal on this adventure. Say, the Jackdaw, it has been upgraded here just to further improve the naval battles, so there's a new secondary fire modes that's been included here just to help keep the action flowing, and it was something I would say that did come in handy on more than a few occasions. Players of the original game, they'll know, but that thrill of taking on a man of war or a fort and just getting away with those crucial final blows are still very much a highlight here. Found myself very often just sailing just to simply get in a fight, and always with that reward of further upgrading my ship even further. Even now, as I look back as someone who wasn't too thrilled about naval combat going into the original game, I found myself in the opposite camp this time around approaching this remake, and the naval combat, I would say, lives up to the expectation as the main draw for me. Each fight felt tense, exciting, and bombastic as well. So I would say that, despite my praise, I still feel this might be a barrier for some new players. However, I would recommend just dialing down the difficulty a little. There's accessibility options aplenty in this game, and difficulty being one of them. And really just get yourself to grips with it, I think some vessels may seem like they're up for a square go, and you might find yourself with a one-way ticket to Davy Jones's locker. With a more open and seamless world for you to sail through here, you can often find yourself wading into a fight you're probably not prepared for. And sometimes the best option here is to try and simply sneak past them. Speaking of sneaking, the stealth and the parkour system as well has been upgraded. The upgrades have stretched into that. I'm going to start with the stealth because Edward can now crouch. Yeah, it sounds daft for something so simple, but whereas in the past this would be reserved for long grass and for cover sections, now we can crouch at will akin to the more recent entries. So you've got way more agency in approaching each stealth encounter that you probably didn't have in the original. There's also a visibility meter that they've added, which you'll be familiar with if you've played Assassin's Creed Shadows. And it's there, they say it's designed to take advantage of the day-night cycle and the weather system. Maybe, and this isn't a flex perhaps as a veteran in me, but I never felt the full benefit of this if I'm honest. However, I did love being able to tackle these more stealthy segments as I pleased. Just that little cycle of using eagle vision, tagging enemies and systematically taking them out. I just feel like the stealth has benefited massively from the overhauls here, and it fleshes out the experience to modern standards. So whilst you're not getting the best stealth game ever, I'd say there's plenty of opportunities to use the verticality and the cover to your advantage just to covertly dispose of enemies. And it's either that or you can simply whistle from a bush and get rid of them. The old tricks still work the best. So you may at times, and you will, have to scamper. And that leads me to the improved parkour system, which is another new feature they're boasting here. But I'd say the biggest compliment I can give it's manoeuvring Edward this time certainly feels way more fluid and less of that slightly stiff feeling from the original. Perhaps I'm spoiled, but I would say it meets the basic requirement I have for any Assassin's Creed game in 2026. So the parkour, it is slick. You go where you want to, and you won't have as many awkward reclimbs. Everything here just flows much better and looks better in motion. And speaking of things looking very, very good, we've got to talk about the graphics in this game. And I can safely say that this game continues on from last year's very stunning Assassin's Creed Shadows, which I would say is easily one of, if not the best looking games I've played in the series now. That is Resynced. And on the PlayStation 5 Pro, the game is just absolutely gorgeous. You know, the sun-kissed setting of the Caribbean constantly gives pops of luscious greenery and very, very luxurious waters. It's very obvious to see why this game fit the remake treatment so well, and the setting, it just translates perfectly from that modern graphical overhaul. It's certainly a looker for sure, and that is quite literally stating the obvious. But I would say it also extends to the more dramatic and moody thunderstorms you'll often navigate at sea. And it's here where that weather system I mentioned earlier really gets to show off. You know, you're going to feel that relief once the clouds part and the sun pokes through. It is quite impressive stuff, and one that my fellow photo mode sickos out there will appreciate. Now, when you compare it to the original, as I was saying, that at the time, the original was seen as being quite gorgeous. You know, it was a good looking game for the time, but when you compare it to this, it does make it look like a more grubby, washed out effort than what is on offer here, you know, and maybe some will prefer the old tone. I feel that the visuals just better match the tale here. You know, the same goes for the new and improved character models, which I feel they're all brought to life with impressive realism. Edward has never looked more handsome, but more often than not, I would say I was more impressed by the supporting cast look than the main character, who, while still very impressive, looked a tad more rough than his friends, albeit handsome, but I admit, that is me quite literally splitting hairs. But I mentioned that supporting cast of characters. I've got to talk about the story now. I would say before I get into it, I appreciate the efforts that they've gone to here in Ubisoft to add more content into the game. There's these cool little what-if quests they've added through the Animus, you know, featuring the likes of Blackbeard, and while not extensive, I still appreciated the effort just to give us a little bit more time with these beloved characters, and I stress the word little, but the objective here was firmly to recreate Black Flag, so while I wasn't expecting a massive expansion, these little bite-sized additions were certainly appreciated perils. Story-wise, still the same tale of Edward Kenway, his quest for riches across the Caribbean during this golden age of piracy, and it's lovingly retold, and they've breathed new life into the tale thanks to this improved fidelity and graphics. You know, it's been well over a decade since I've played Black Flag, so my recollection of the story is really in broad strokes. However, I enjoyed the throwback to this more traditional style Assassin's Creed game, where you're moving from set piece to set piece throughout history, be that from being marooned to suddenly back in full gear. It can be goofy, but I'd be lying if I was to say it didn't trigger this strange nostalgia for this before the series became 100-hour epics, which I am still a fan of. My criticism here is the same as the original, in that the story works best surprisingly when it's not really shoehorning in this centuries-old conflict between assassins and Templars. You know, you'll echo Addy and the crew when they're reminding Edward to stop changing or stop chasing these series MacGuffins and focus on the privateering. And it does bog things down a tad, and by the end you'll be left with that love and affection for your pirate family. And it's still a tale that peppers in legendary figures from history to great effect. I'd say the story still stands up today, and I'll avoid spoilers even though it is over a decade old at this point. I still think it's one worth experiencing. You know, the legend of Edward Kenway still rings true, blemishes and all, but it's no wonder why he's still one of the series' most beloved characters, and a prime example for why he should have got the remake treatment. And in terms of that as well, the open world, maybe have to discuss that here. I mean, Black Flag, it wasn't a small game by any stretch of the imagination, and it's made to feel even larger here. You know, they've added more islands to explore, there's more content throughout the world, as well as the ability just to even simply dive anywhere, which will make everything feel more coherent than before. One of the highlights of this game is that its true sense of adventure. You know, you're encouraged to devour this world at your own pace. It's that classic old open world setup of always having something to draw your eye. You'll have the updated HUD, which is more in line with the modern games, so the icons of anything in range are gently peppered in at the top of the screen's compass. It's always encouraging you just to have a nosy over this way and that way, and there's always more treasure, always more activities. This might be a wee bit overwhelming to some that maybe aren't as familiar with this series of game. Even though it is presented very cleanly, there is such a volume of things to do here that you might be put off a bit. However, while this game landed just before the icon janitor era of Assassin's Creed games as it was once harkened to back in the day, its more open, island-filled world just benefits from having a bit of literal breathing space as you hop between destinations to explore, and it's always harkening back to that pirate fantasy. You know, I still thoroughly just love my time here, finding secret chests and clearing locations and just sailing off to the next place and just having a little exploration. And I would say as well, there are built-up areas, and the most built-up areas here are the cities such as Havana and Nassau. They don't overstay their welcome, and they are more densely populated towns, but they feel brimming with life, and they provide a more vibrant offbeat in a series that's usually associated with building and one too many rooftops, you know. And it's one of the reasons why this game is likely so beloved. It just kind of turns everything that you would associate with Assassin's Creed right in its head. Closing thoughts though, I would say Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced is a wonderful remake, one that proves that you can breathe new life into the series' best installments. It lovingly recreates and modernises the games for old fans and new. So if you're not a fan of Assassin's Creed style games, this is still an adventure that I'd recommend to anyone looking to hop aboard the series for the first time. What that means for Ubisoft going forward, who knows, but it's clear here that they can lovingly recreate some of the more beloved entries in all of their IPs going forward. Does it mean more remakes? Who knows, but if they do decide to do one, I hope that they show the same type of love and attention as they've given to Edward Kenway, the Jackdaw, and all the crew. Just begs the question, what Assassin's Creed character comes next? Could we be going back to Italy? Who knows? But what I would say is that Assassin's Creed Black Flag Resynced is certainly the definitive way to play this pirate adventure. Sailing the Seven Seas has never looked or played this good, and that's why I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. And for more reviews and coverage like this, please subscribe to our channel, Pixel Parents Podcast, and we're there with new episodes every Friday. Till next time, thank you.